So, welcome. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Lagos, Nigeria, where it is 12:30 p.m., 1st of June, 2020. So, this is the third in a three-part series on emotional intelligence. We wanted to have a truly African conversation on COVID-19 and emotional intelligence in Africa. COVID-19 is an opportunity. So, if you missed the first part of the series, which we had on May 27th, you missed a lot. That part was on COVID-19, emotional intelligence, and the African context. 2 days later, on May 29th, we had part 2, which was on COVID-19, emotional intelligence and organizations in Africa. So how we started to delve in from looking at the contextual background, delving into organizations. Today, part 3, the discussion will be COVID-19, leadership, institutions, and education in Africa. Can EI, emotional intelligence, lead the way? This webinar is brought to you by the Lagos Business School, the Graduate Business School of the Pan-Atlantic University. It's one among several conversations that we've had since the beginning of the pandemic, some on business risk and mitigation strategies, webinars on finance, the good, the bad, and the ugly, marketing, customer engagement in a pandemic, HRO, positioning organizations to manage employees remotely. So since human beings are the most important resource that an organization can count on, and seeing COVID-19 as an opportunity, we brought together experts, really, literally, truly experts from different parts of Africa, all professors, from the East, from East Africa, Carl Wagner from the Strathmore Business School, Kenya. From West Africa, Uchora Udoji from the Lagos Business School, Nigeria. Also from West Africa, Kwesi Amponsah-Tawiah from the University of Ghana Business School, Ghana. From North Africa, Mohamed Radwan from the American University in Cairo School of Business, Egypt. And then from South Africa, Basi Leonard from the University of Stellenbosch Business School, South Africa. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for making time, the third time now, to discuss with us and then share your views. So it's really been very enlightening experience. Now, what I'm going to do, I hope I do justice to it, because if you missed the first two, you really missed a lot. What did we talk about? In the first webinar, Basi took us through a definition of EQ, made us understand that there were two dimensions, personal and interpersonal. He also touched on competencies of EQ, EI, acronyms, emotional intelligence or emotional quotient. He took us through competencies such as self-awareness, self-regulation, flexibility. Kwesi, well, he said that Africans have a natural EQ, and then he proved it. He took us through some African proverbs, and he was relating each of these proverbs to competencies, such as competencies like self-awareness. And then Uchora said that EQ, emotional quotient, does not translate across cultures, which is why cultural intelligence, another type of intelligence, complements emotional intelligence. And then Carl suggested two competencies that will be essential in dealing with the pandemic: empathy and resilience, for example. And then Mohamed, who is an expert in measurement, took us through the measurement of these competencies. And then in the second webinar, May 29th, I asked Basi what we should look out for in current and future leaders. And then he mentioned things like integrity, vision, trustworthiness, decisiveness, empathy. Okay. And another interesting thing about Basi's contribution was he was able to tie dimensions of leadership to emotional intelligence. Dimensions of leadership: being, doing, knowing, thinking. And then still continuing the conversation on intelligence, Kwesi reminded us that intelligence goes beyond acting intelligently. And he talked about how EQ fosters communication, for example, at group levels in organizations, or how EQ affects the creation of organizational climate. Then Uchora, in that second webinar, said that there is a link between national culture, leaders, organizations, and emotional intelligence. Of course, she also pointed out that Often we find organizational culture at variance with national culture. Therefore, we have to find a balance. I mean, functional expertise is necessary, yes, but we should not only use it as a criteria, for example, for promotion or distribution of tasks. And then Carl reminded us that emotional intelligence helps us to engage people to perform better, which is one of the goals of organizations. Then Mohamed touched on the role of executive coaching to develop EQ competencies of leaders in Africa. For example, to also know when to use coaching, training, and mentoring in organizations. But in that seminar, there are many questions from the audience. What's the difference between teaching and coaching? So I think we're going to dive right in. I hope I've done justice to what the presenter was richer than this, but we're going to share the videos with you. And I'm going to run several polls. Well, not too many. I'm going to run the first one now. Yeah, but before that, a bit of only one announcement really. The most important announcement is that at the bottom of your screen, you will see the Q&A button. That's where I will go to get your questions and comments. Hopefully, you can upvote questions. So before you ask a question, take a look and see if someone before you had asked that question. If the question exists, simply give it a thumbs up. So I will ask the questions with the highest number of thumbs up. Again, the Q&A button at the bottom. So I'm going to launch the first poll now. All right, so there is a poll running. Just take a few minutes to complete this for me. I'm going to run two polls. This is the first one. I give a minute or two for this first one and a minute or two for the second one. All right, people are voting. Thank you very much. It's just one question. We would like to know your concerns. I am more concerned about what are the options, what world will be like post-COVID-19, what my continent will be like post-COVID-19, what my country will be like post-COVID-19, what the town where I live will be like post-COVID-19, what my hometown, if you don't understand hometown, what my hometown will be like post-COVID-19. Thank you very much. 56% have voted. Okay. I want you to, take this one before I run the second one. Very good. We have people from different parts of the world with us. From the names here, I'll come back to this, but from the names here, you can see the different parts of Africa represented, if I'm not mistaken. All right, 75% have voted. I'm going to end this poll shortly to run the next one. I give another 30 seconds, and then I end this first poll and run the second one. Another 30 seconds. If something is obscuring your vision, you may have to go behind that to see the poll. Ending this poll in 7 seconds, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so I'm going to run the next one now. Poll number 2 is up. Poll number 2. What do you feel are the main factors restricting the development of a united Africa with a focus on growing Africa for Africa by Africa? What do you feel are the main factors restricting the development of a united Africa with a focus on growing Africa for Africa by Africa? What are the options? The countries are all too different. I can see too much corruption, lack of trust between African countries. African countries are too internally focused. The West blocks Africa from uniting. Africa is too large. It will be hard to coordinate the union. All right, so I'm going to let that run for 1 more minute. Thank you for voting. 60% have voted. 66%. Okay, once we are done with the poll, we will go to our panelists who are eagerly waiting to share their insights with you. All right, so I'm going to end this in 20 seconds. There's a poll going on now. This will end in less than 10 seconds. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Very good. I will share the results with you. Results of poll 1, there you go. Results of poll 1, there you go. 55% are concerned about what the world will be like post-COVID-19. 40% what my country will be like post-COVID-19. 4% what my continent will be like post-COVID-19. 1% what the town where I live will be like post-COVID-19. Nobody talked about their hometown. All right, so you have that. I'm going to share the results of the second poll. What do you feel are the main factors restricting the development of United Africa with a focus on growing Africa, for Africa, by Africa? 57% said too much corruption. I am not surprised at this. Too much corruption. 36% lack of trust between African countries. 21% there's a tie. 21% said African countries are too internally focused. Another 21% the West blocks Africa from uniting. By the way, this is a multiple choice question, and then 14% the countries are all too different. 7% Africa is too large. Very good, thank you, and I think we will proceed. Thank you very much, welcome again, and I'm going to go straight to West Africa. I'm going to Kwesi. In previous conversations, one of the attributes that I think Carl mentioned was resilience. Resilience. Let's apply that to the economy. Now, I'd like to ask whether EI matters in creating a resilient economy. We'll have 5 minutes each, or maximum 8 minutes to talk about this. Does EI matter in the creation of a resilient economy? Kwesi, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eugene, for your question. And to address your question, I would want to look at resilience and what resilience is. And I would want to quote from the former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. He makes a statement that, well, you don't judge me by my success, but judge me by the number of times that, well, I was able to rise up when I fell. So, and that is what the talk of resilience is all about. Your ability to indeed bounce back. Resilience is about much more developing an immunity to adversity. And that is what resilience is all about. The talk of resilience is all about. Indeed, if you look at the talk of resilience and what we experience and now in terms of COVID-19, you will understand that, well, resilience plays an important role, and as we've learned in emotional intelligence, particularly with self-motivation and how it helps in creating resilience, you will get to understand that, well, one of the key elements in navigating the turbulence of our time is human resilience. Not just ensuring survival of economies, but also the prosperity of economies is resilience, human resilience, which is much more to say it is much more an intuitive response to excessive adversity or much more acute stressful conditions that human beings experience, just such as the COVID. So for me, human resilience is key. And that is also made manifest. If you look at the first Kuwait, if you look at the first Gulf War that happened, you reckon that, well, the country, Kuwait, was able to bounce back because of human resilience. Because of human resilience. So it tells you that, well, human resilience plays a key role in the adaptation, in the economies of countries really bouncing back. And that is what I would want us to talk about. So the question now is that how are you able to create resilience within economies? And that is key. Understand the fact that when you are talking about resilience in economy, resilience just like emotional intelligence that we talk about. Yes, economies are able to create what we call a culture of resilience, where individuals, a culture of resilience in itself tends to manifest itself much more in some sort of psychological immunity to adversity, and much more talking about a rebound in the face of adversity. So it is key that we understand that yes, we could have a culture of creating that culture of resilience within economies, and that is what will ensure. How do we create a culture of resilience within economies? In creating cultures of resilience within economy, leadership plays a role. Leadership plays an important role in creating cultures of resilience. It is said that leaders of economies indeed have the ability to tip their economies in a direction towards resilience. And in so doing, because they serve much more as catalysts to some group cohesion within the economy, and they also serve as, boosting the morale and getting people dedicated to the ideals and the values of their particular economies as well. So leadership plays an important role. But just as Basil indicated to us last week, you reckon that in order to do that, the leaders would have to possess some 4 core attributes, which we learned to be the attribute of optimism, the attribute of decisiveness, the attribute of openness to communication. That is very essential, and the attribute of integrity. As leaders possess these attributes, what they tend to do is that they generate credibility amongst the other people and through their role modeling behaviors. And they're serving as conduits of information to the people. They are able to create such a culture of resilience within the economies. It is important that we understand that looking at this attribute, as a psychologist, I would want to relate these attributes to that of Albert Bandura's self-efficacy. You reckon that just like these attributes generate credibility and itself highlight the issue of self-efficacy, which speaks to individuals' belief in itself, and individuals serving as a catalyst to change, even during post-COVID. It is very, very key. And you realize that the perception of self-efficacy in itself also generates certain behaviors, i.e., it determines the course of actions of people, one of it. It in itself will also determine the energy that individuals would want to put in a particular endeavor. It also determines how ready individuals are prepared to endure in the face of adversity. It also speaks to how resilient individuals will be. So you just see that yes, it is important we understand that resilience and through the issues of self-efficacy would play a key role in getting economies to bounce back. So leaders would have to be looking at creating that culture of resilience in their country. And in doing so, let us look at some of the qualities of a resilient organization or a resilient economy. You reckon that in a resilient economy, yes, they are able to identify emerging threats and able to understand their impact on the economy. Hence, are also able to put in place measures to deal with this situation. Secondly, in resilient economies, one of the things that you notice is the fact that, yes, they tend to have very strong support from the stakeholder in terms of stakeholder relationship. So you reckon that there's a strong stakeholder relationship, yes, in engagement of the citizenry, in engagement of the captains of industry, in engagement of the chieftaincy systems and regimes and so forth and so on. This relationship and investment in this relationship all will ensure a resilient economy. Thirdly, One of the things that we need to understand is the fact that in the creation of the resilient economy, it is also imperative that yes, economies also develop leadership, because the direction of leadership is key. With resilient leadership comes the creation of a resilient economy. And to sum up, what I would want to say is that the fact that yes, having resilient leaders in economies will ensure the creation of resilient cultures. And if you look at the tenets of resilient leaders, as we have discussed in our other webinars, you get to realize that emotional intelligence is key for the development of resilient leadership and hence the creation of resilient cultures. Thank you very much, Eugene.
Wonderful, Kwesi. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Now, with that insight, I like how you tied the creation of a resilient economy to leadership. And I think I would like to go to Mohamed. I'd like to go to Mohamed because not only because you have been measuring emotional intelligence of leaders, but also because you have served on the board of many companies and you still serve in several. So Mohamed, if we have you there, I would like to ask, what do you think, what is the role? My focus is now on the leadership capabilities of the board of directors, okay? What is the role of the board of directors leadership in building the EI of the organization?
Thank you. Thank you, I'll try my best to address the question. The board of directors, or the leader on the boards, have a major responsibility. The pressure on them to perform these days is increasing during post-COVID-19. And part of what the board needs to do is to set the direction on a strategic level, set the focus and the priority expectations going through this period. And there is a high need for the leaders on the board to what we call reinstate relationship expectations with all the stakeholders. Now, in order for the board to do that, they need to shift their thinking from what we call a survival attitude, which is getting by, and what we call a mindful attitude, which is getting the best out of the people within organizations to perform at their best level. This is where the whole emotional intelligence or EQ plays a very critical role in supporting the board to do that. So give you an example of what I mean by reinstating the relationship with stakeholders. So, for example, if you look at employees,
Mohamed,
yes.
Mohamed, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It looks like the audio is not coming through very clearly.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I am going to go to Uchora now, and then I will return to you. Okay. That wasn't coming through clearly from your end. So sorry about the interruption.
No problem. I'll be back.
So Uchora, I'm not putting you on the spot. You're ready. So now let's go to national institutions, okay? Because you've spoken a lot about organizational culture, national culture. What role can national institutions play in emphasizing the importance of EI? Unmute your mic now, Uchera.
Thank you. Thank you again. One of the things I find is much of the models on emotional intelligence suggest that developing one's emotional intelligence starts with developing oneself, and then you become ready to focus on others. And so it's really self to others. That's typically the model. So let me just start from there, because this is what informs the whole business of national culture. In my classrooms, however, my students in leadership positions argue that emotional intelligence is a conversation for wealthy people, for people who have settled into their careers, and for people who have attained some kind of elite status. And they say this because they say a person has to meet their basic needs first. Roof over my head, food on the table, and that it's only when you have met those needs or when those needs have been met, that things like self-awareness become important. And they tell me that in Africa, you don't require self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-motivation and all that to manage the relationships that enable you survive. You don't even need empathy. You just fall in line, do what you're asked to do. And so for some of the leaders I have spoken with, a subservient version of relationship management would be a first competency of emotional intelligence. It took me some time to understand what they were trying to express because it was hard. However, I eventually understood it, that what they were trying to tell me is that self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation are difficult when the environment is not enabling. And this is what informed the question that you asked. Because really, let's face it, Eugene, and everyone, emotional intelligence cannot work in isolation. It can't. And let's just talk about our social institutions, because the relationship between the quality of a country's institutions and their level of economic development has been established. So let me start with the family. The family is the primary agency for socializing people into society. And in our first webinar, Kwesi established that emotional intelligence for the African is somewhat innate. And I agree with him. But Africa is changing. We don't tell tales by moonlight anymore to our children. And we hardly speak in proverbs when we meet. So our collective emotional intelligence that established Africa in very strong family cultures and traditions are fast disappearing, and there's nothing immediately available to replace them. So, for example, you take the case of postnatal depression in young mothers, it's on a geometric rise because the family institutions that used to support the young mothers through postnatal periods, those things are phasing out. Grandmothers in the family who used to take turns in caring for the nursing mother are now necessarily engineers on oil rigs, they are judges, they are bankers, and so on and so forth. Now, let's again look at our religious institutions. Those institutions once ensured the transmission of certain aspects of emotional intelligence, like wisdom, empathy, resilience. But those emotional intelligence-based teachings are now replaced with miraculous prosperity, teachings of miraculous prosperity. Our education institutions, and Professor Basil is going to talk a lot more about this when I'm done. They're responsible for imparting knowledge and skills. Tell me, where in our primary, secondary, and tertiary curriculums is emotional intelligence emphasized? In our primary schools, children are being taught sex education instead of emotion education. Government is supposed to formulate and enforce rules and policy. Look at governance. Where is the emotional intelligence reflected in governance across Africa? Where is the role modeling of peace and order? The handling of the lockdown, the distribution of palliatives and so forth in the first wave of COVID-19 once again displayed the difficulties of governance in Africa. In the economy, where is the self-awareness? Where is the empathy? What are the plans for ensuring that Africans who are unable to fend for themselves are provided at least the minimum required to meet basic needs? When the family has failed, and religion has failed, and education has failed, what is left to be delivered economically and politically, unfortunately, is a downgrade. My millennial students, and I would like to bring them in here, the generations Y and Z, the people we call the future of Africa, they ask me, how does one work on himself or herself in an environment that consistently beats you down? But my managers, their managers in my class express their frustrations in dealing with these millennials. They compare them with the baby boomers and the X generations. They say millennials have their own track and mindset. They expect to achieve their bold career goals in a very short time, and yet they lack the commitment and the willingness to put in the effort that is required and so forth. They say that they are very poor team players and so on. And so the result is conflict that leads to disengagement and sometimes turnover among millennial employees in organizations. Well, our millennials are products of our failed institutions. Millennials don't care much for power, distance, and community. They don't care about things like good manners. They are not punctual to meetings or punctual to work. And you don't see them ashamed, embarrassed about it. They are not altruistic. They are impatient. They are hungry. They are ambitious. As one of my executive coaches once told me, from day one, you can read you read from their faces that they want your job. When they said that, I had a really good laugh. But you know, these millennials quit their jobs without notice, even when they don't know where the next meal is coming from, because they have been taught by their parents and later by online motivational speakers that they can be whatever they want to be, that they have the power to decide. And they are not interested in working for one organization for 10 years. And yet, organizations need these young people if they want to establish, for example, meaningful leadership pipelines. And so organizations will have to find a way to align their people strategy with the needs and expectations of that generation, because they are the future of this continent. Development of their emotional intelligence is important because they didn't get it from family, they didn't get it from formal education, they didn't get it from their churches or from their mosques, and certainly they don't see it role modeled in governance or in the economy. Organizations will have to, for example, consider the nature of that generation in designing attraction and retention strategies. Onboarding and later socialization programs will have to reflect content that helps them settle down into a mutually beneficial relationship with their employers. Social institutions play a vital role in the economic and political development of a country, and it could be that a lack of emotional intelligence or its weak presence in the way our institutions operate could be the reason social institutions today are the obstacles to economic growth in Africa. And so, yes, institutions need to play a role in emphasizing emotional intelligence, and this, I think, perhaps will support the practicality of from self to others in an African context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uchora. Thank you. Thank you. So the enabling environment, and I like how you mentioned several institutions, family, government, social, educational. Thanks a lot. I'd like to come back to Mohamed. Mohamed,
yes,
thank you for your patience.
Can you hear me better?
Yes, say that again. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Earlier, I wanted to know the role of the board of directors leadership in building the EI of the organization.
Okay. So basically, what I was starting to highlight is that the main role of the leaders of the board is to set the strategic direction and control. And when you look at the strategic direction, today they're required to set the priorities and the expectations of all the stakeholders and reinstate the relationship expectations with all of them. Now, in order for the board to do that, there's a step prior where they have to first start with themselves as leaders of the board. They will have to, can you still hear me well?
Mohamed, looks like you're breaking. Huh?
Am I still breaking? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me, or yes, you're breaking up. Sorry.
Yes, it's chopping a lot.
Okay, let's do this. If you switch to another question, what I'll do, I'll switch the connection and reconnect again from a different network. Would it work?
So I'll come back to you again. I'll come back to you again. Yes, sorry about that, Mohamed. Sorry, everyone. All right, so right now, what I would like to do before going to Carl and Basi and then coming back to Mohamed, I'd like to share again the result of the poll that you took earlier. All right, so here the first question was what I'm more concerned about. Here you go. I'm more concerned about, and then here is the results. 55% more concerned about what the world will be like post-COVID-19. 40% what my country will be like post-COVID-19. And then the second poll, here is the result. What do you feel are the main factors restricting the development of United Africa with a focus on growing Africa for Africa by Africa? By the way, there is a comment from one of the attendees about this. We'll talk about it later. And then most of you, 57% said too much corruption, followed by lack of trust between African countries. And then there's a tie between African countries that are too internally focused, and then the West blocks Africa from uniting. And then 14% the countries are all too different. 7% Africa is too large to be hard to coordinate the union. All right. So, okay, Mohamed, let's give it another try. Since Mohamed, yes, Mohamed.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, that's better.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's working. I switched to a new network, and that's part of the disruption we're living in today.
Yeah.
The question is the leaders of the board and how can they play a role in this whole emotional intelligence and directing the organization. And what I was trying to bring the attention of the audience is that the main responsibility of the board is two things: setting the strategic direction and control. So if I look at setting the strategic direction, what's required for them, our key focus is restating the relationship of expectations with all the stakeholders they're dealing with. Now, in order for the board to do that effectively, they have to start with a prior step, which is restating their own, what we call a thinking attitude, from what it's called a survival attitude or survival thinking, which is just getting by, into what we call a mindful attitude. And that's how can I get the best out of the organization, out of the people and everyone in their position to perform at their best, and therefore help the organization get through this period and grow afterward. And once the board or the leaders reach that mindful thinking attitude, and then they look at restating the relationship, I'll give you some of the examples of what boards are looking at today, is let's say when it comes to employees, prior to COVID-19, the focus was on career development, your compensation, how can we attract you and retain you. Going forward, the key focus board are looking at is security and safety. With shareholders, it was profitability. Now it's sustainability. With customers, it's about giving them the product and the solutions they need. Post is about how can I provide a full solution, yet it's compliance from a risk perspective of what we're going through today. On a business level, from business as usual to on a short term, what we call a minimum viable business today, and more of a revisiting your business model for growth in the future. So these are just some examples of how the board is responsible for restating this relationship and translating these into practices within the organization. Now, there's something that Kwesi mentioned early on that touch on what I was thinking is the whole resilience, and that's a role or responsibility of the board, is how can I build a business risk resilience within this evolving environment that we are working in or living in today. And to do that, there's probably 5 things you have to look at as leaders of the board. The first thing is you need to start re-examining the board governance and the structure or composition of the board. Do we have the right board in place? So for example, there's a recent study was done where they looked at the emotional intelligence of leaders of the board and assessed them and compared them to the general population. And they found out of the 15 subscales, almost all board directors who are effective, and the study was linked to business result, retention, growth. They had certain KPIs to draw that. They had 8 subscales that were higher than any of the general population when it comes to emotional assessment, emotional intelligence measurement or assessment. And the top of these 3 were reality testing, self-regard, and problem solving. Now, if you look at these top 3, 2 are in the category of decision-making, and 1 is in the category of stress management. So the board is looking, how can I make decisions under stress, basically. And this is where emotional intelligence comes in and play a critical role. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to plan a new reporting and transparency for the organization, because the expectations of what you're communicating today is different. Build a resilience in technology, if technology is going to be a major part of your growth. Also strengthening the skills with a focus on emotional intelligence skills of your leaders, because they're the ones who are going to mitigate the risk and make it happen. And design and clarify how your business operation, when it comes to risk management, is going to operate. So that's basically some of the key highlights of what boards are discussing on the table today, and hope that addressed the questions. And I think you guys can still hear me. The voice is still there. Yes. Okay, good.
So the first thing, Mohamed, that's resilience on your part. Thanks to your resilience, we were able to get these rich insights. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So you see, was that what we're going to miss? So I'm very happy we're able to hear you. Okay, I'm going to go to Carl right away. Mohamed, I'll come back and take you up on some of these soft skills and then these competencies you mentioned earlier. So Carl, so if we accept that an effective organizational culture drives effective organizational performance, okay, what do you see as the role that effective levels of EQ can play in driving this culture? What role will EQ play in driving this culture?
Okay, Eugene, yeah, thank you for the question, and I think I'd like to link it to what we've already heard. We've heard from Kwesi in terms of the resilient economy and the role we have to play in our organization to achieve a resilient economy. We've heard about the role of the board from Mohamed in terms of driving and creating a sense of EQ or EI in an organization. And I think we can probably fairly safely say that there does seem to be a decent correlation between organizational culture, let's call it a healthy organizational culture, and performance. And there's the hackneyed saying of culture eats strategy for breakfast, etc. But if we are saying that an effective, healthy organizational culture will aid an organization in delivering, therefore it will aid that organization in becoming resilient, it will aid the economy in becoming resilient, and therefore we do need to look at what are some of those core competencies, core things that we need as leaders to be able to create an organizational culture that is effective for that organization, but also contributes to our countries and, as per our one poll, our continent. And if we go back, they would all apply. If I have a look at it, if I want my organizational culture to be effective, healthy, and positive, and therefore contribute to organizational sustainability and growth, and also Kwesi's point, resilience, I do need to have a good level of self-awareness. I need to understand what it is that I am doing. And our executives need to understand that in terms of the culture that they're creating. They definitely need to have an awareness of others. They need to have an empathy of others. And so often what we see is a huge gap between your exco level and the rest of the organization. They seem to be on this island where they're not even aware of what's happening in the organization. They have a vision, which is great, but it's not being cascaded, it's not being translated. Another core element has to be creating an organizational culture. So we're saying we've got to create an organizational culture where people are heard, where people are involved. An organizational culture, and we heard this from Basil right at the beginning in our first webinar, is not just about a mission, vision, and value statement on the wall of the reception area of the organization. Organizational culture is effective when it lives in the hearts of the individuals, excuse me, when it is basically what is driving the behavior of people. And that's what we need to be able to do as leaders. And to do that, we need to have the ability to as leaders, be self-aware and aware of others and show empathy, but to create a culture where we have an awareness of others, where we have an empathy of others. I think it is quite possible to still have a fairly result-driven, fairly tough culture, if you wanted to call it that, but there still has to be a foundation of empathy and understanding for others, because that is what drives people, the culture drives people, the people and the culture drive the energy, the engagement, and that is what then drives results. If I could just take a moment and extrapolate that further and go into the poll that we had in terms of, all right, if that's what we're going to do in our organizations, what do we have to do in our continent? How do we create an Africa for Africa by Africa? And I know there's been an interesting question on our Q&A of not being isolationist, and I agree with that, but we have too much in Africa where we do not beneficiate. In South Africa, we dig up gold, we send it overseas, and then we buy it back at a huge price. In Uganda, we grow coffee beans, we send them overseas, and we buy it back at a huge price. We are not growing our own continent. And I think if we're saying we need to have, or the role of EQ in our organizational culture, we've also got to say, how does this impact on our continent? How do we get things like the African Free Trade Agreement to work? We've already seen that we have a concern that it's not going to work because of corruption, that we're too big. So how do we get that to work so that we do start developing a common Africa? And if we do not have that empathy, that understanding for others, and now we're going beyond my own country, now we're going into Africa. Chora in our previous session talked about the national culture and a national way of doing things. And I think there is an African culture. I think there is something about Africans in Africa, and how do we capitalize on that? And I do believe a valuable level of emotional intelligence can help us have the empathy and understanding for others, which can assist our organizations, which drives our culture, which also then can be of value in terms of the broader continent. Without becoming isolationists, I think we can benefit from the rest of the world, but I think we've got to make sure we take care of home as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carl. Fantastic. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And I think, please, participants, thank you very much and welcome. Please, I invite you to look at the Q&A, even if you don't have a question. There are several questions in the Q&A box. Help me decide which to ask. How do you do that? Upvote the questions you like, okay, so that I ask the questions with the highest number of upvotes. Thank you to some of you who have already done that. So look at the Q&A box, look at the questions there, even if you don't have a question, upvote the ones you want us to answer in this webinar because we have very little time. So I'm going to go to Basi. Basi, I want to go to, because we're looking at institutions, is another one aspect we're looking at today. And then Uchora, in talking about institutions, mentioned educational institutions. So I'd like to ask how you see our educational institutions changing in the future.
Thank you, Eugene. I think that before I actually go to the institutions, may I respond to a question that was asked on Wednesday last week. And if you don't mind, I'd like to read the question, and then it's very good to see how that particular question ties in with what Uchora said earlier. And I thought this may be an apt time to do this now. The question that one of the participants asked was, how do I train children to learn the difference between assertiveness and violence, developing them to air their feelings constructively? And I thought that was a beautiful question asked. I'd like to now tie this also in with our educational institutions. So allow me to say that I think our whole paradigm around educational institutions are going to have to change. I believe that up to this point in time, it's been the buildings and the campuses and the beautiful hostels. And when parents want to get their children into any of these, we invite them to come and see all of that. I'm going to link what I want to say to this question back to what Uchora said. I think we've seen it now during these months of COVID. The major educational institution over these few months have actually been the home. Now, we miss that point very easily because we tend to want to almost refer our responsibility to the teacher or the lecturer or the professor, instead of thinking, what is our role? So in answering this question on how do we develop emotional intelligence in children, may I say that I believe children learn what they live. And that the best way to teach or train children is to do it by example. When children observe how parents settle their disagreements, how parents deal with anger, how parents deal with disappointments, they are very likely to do the same when they are confronted with similar situations. But now there is something rather sad that I have to bring to all of our attention, something that we all know, but I think it's worth noting. Many children, however, are not raised by both parents, because we have single parent homes, we have child-headed homes, we have homes where parents are from different cultures and different religions and different races. And the parents in turn have all been raised differently. To make it even more complex, we have these days this question of where mom and dad are no longer married. So the children move from one home to another. And interestingly, we find very many times almost an upmanship coming in there. So the one parent, when he has or she has the children, wants to outshine the other one, so that when they go back, they can say, what did mommy or daddy do for me? And I think the best thing that parents can do is to sit down and decide together, how are we going to raise children? And I think if we do that well, we are going to see how our children will be able to develop the necessary emotional intelligence that are needed. If I get to the bigger question of our educational institutions, I really believe our paradigms have shifted here already. What we are seeing currently is, of course, remote and virtual teaching and learning. Even the administration of these organizations are now all done remotely. But immediately what we are seeing now, and I'm sure you are also finding the same, there are so much of catch-up that needs to be done. Curricula that has to be completed, extra classes that these young people have to attend. But over the long term, what I can see if I think of our educational institution, that many courses may need to be redone. They need to be changed. I am going to suggest very strongly that we all think of incorporating leadership and emotional intelligence as an elective in every course. So whether you become a theologian, or whether you become a medical doctor, or whether you become a scientist, as you move up your corporate ladder, you need leadership, you need emotional intelligence. And once you are up there, to now want to introduce it could perhaps be too late for some. Some of the areas of concern I do have, though, around the future is that all faculty and learners or students may not adapt. Very many people prefer the face-to-face interaction. And all of a sudden, you have a 6-year-old who must sit in front of a screen all day. It just cannot be the best for them. And then I also feel that there are health and hygiene issues, definitely emotional intelligence issues, this of social distancing and sanitizing and the impact that has on us. I also think that the limited physical contact with other people will not be a positive for the future. One of the other things I see, especially with our faculty and our teachers, is burnout levels. In the past, we used to go from 8 in the morning till 5. I now find many colleagues and friends who work till 8, even at 10 at night, because they're working from home. They don't really switch off. And so there's also an increased workload level for faculty and teachers, because I'm teaching during the day, but then I must still run remote sessions with students who want to interact with me. There's also something interesting I'm noticing, and that is that self-study actually requires different or new approaches for students. And again, we must admit, everybody can't do that well. They like to see the professor or like to see the teacher. And then something that I'm a little bit concerned about is just the use of copyrighted materials in the virtual space. How do we ensure that when somebody uses material or shows a video, that would be okay for everybody across the world to see? Just some of my thoughts on how I see the future for educational institutions.
Thank you very much, Basil. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I have another question for all the panelists, but before that, I'll go to the Q&A box and not ask a question. I'll leave the questions for later, but there are some comments I would like to read. But in the meantime, here is what I'm going to ask the panelists so you get ready. Can you see some good coming to Africa from the pandemic? Can you see some good coming to Africa from the pandemic? All right, so here is Zineb Dracy. Hello, dear speakers. Greetings from Morocco. You're welcome. Thanks for holding this wonderful session. You're welcome, Zineb. Okay, and then there's a question about, I see several people upvoted this question. Will we be able to obtain a certificate of attendance by the end of this webinar? No. I think, but yeah, that's the short answer. But maybe if we talk to the institutions involved, they can have, after all, this is a new reality. Right now, as far as I know, certificate of attendance, no. What else can we answer quickly? Okay, so this is a comment. Uchora, thank you so much, because I'm reading it because it got several upvotes. Uchora, thank you so much for such a deep insight. I agree that Africa, this is from Nkechi Asawa, I agree that Africa is fast losing their culture, which held our families together and provided emotional intelligence. Thank you. Any other comment? Hello, everyone. Where can I find recordings of part 1 and 2 of this webinar? So when you registered, you submitted your contact details, they'll be shared with you. Okay. Very good. So I'm going to come to my question, and I'd like you to make it brief, ladies and gentlemen. Can you see some good coming to Africa from the pandemic? Well, the ladies will always have to go first. So, Uchara, you don't mind if I start with you? Yeah, I'm going to, yeah, this, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So one of the things I think has, people talk a whole lot about the adversity of COVID, and my heart goes out to the people who have lost their loved ones and who have gone through some very tough economic strains and so on and so forth, But the truth of the matter is that in adversity, you can find opportunities. In adversity, you can find some positive things. And so one of the things I think that Africa should take away from COVID is the fact that only Africa can save Africa. Only Africa can take care of Africa. What I saw in all this is that somehow continents kind of got together and they tried, first of all, to help their countries. If they had medication, they kept it within their countries, and they made sure that their countries had enough before they started selling to other countries and then outside the continent. And so you look at my country, we had shortages of face masks. We had problems with getting gloves. The prices of those things, those medical supplies went up. And so on. So I think that one of the things that Africa is likely to benefit from this is a realization. And I'm hoping that that realization and that awakening, that Africa will cash in on it and begin to think about supply chain, about production, making some of these things in Africa and supplying to Africa. That's one thing I would like to see happen. And I think it's a great opportunity coming from COVID-19. I'll allow some other person to have a word.
Thank you very much, Uchara. Yes, Mohamed.
Okay, yes, I see potential on 3 levels. On an individual level, there is more people today are focusing on their EQ development than I ever seen before in the last few months. And that produces a lot of hope for the future, especially with the young leaders. The second point is that leaders on the board today are focusing on resilience and agility. Now, I attended board meetings in the region before. That was not a top priority on the agenda. And that is saying that they're more focusing on playing the role correctly. The third thing I see is a start of effort for cooperation between organizations within the region. As I'll give you two examples. One is boards are revisiting their board structure and inviting board members from other countries in the region, so to create potential of cooperations and how we can actually cross-develop both sides. Another example is this panel. It's probably my first experience working across the Africa region. 5 panelists are trying to share the experience and put things together. So this is another example of effort happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. Yes, Kwesi, wanna have a go?
Yes, well, thank you very much. Well, just to add to what my other colleagues have already said, I must indicate as well, yes, indeed, amidst the challenges are opportunities. Well, and yes, as Africa, we need not run away from the opportunities. Well, I would want to relate it biblically to the man David. When he encountered the bear, he didn't run away from the bear. He faced the bear. And having encountered the bear and dealt with the bear, when he met Goliath, he was able to come up with innovative skills in dealing with Goliath. In understanding that, well, Michael Fullan will mention that problems are our friends. It is only through immersing ourselves in problems that we come out strong with innovative skills. With the current COVID, you realize that, well, yes, we are becoming self-dependent. When it comes to Ghana, for instance, well, a lot of institutions, pharmaceutical institutions, are now producing sanitizers. Hitherto, we used to import them. When it comes to the nose mask and the face mask, you reckon that, well, a number of organizations are now beginning to produce it in the country. Our researchers, our scientists in our institutions are now thinking very deep. And you reckon that, well, in Ghana, when you come to the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, well, they are producing ventilators there now. As a result of this, well, had it not been that challenge, well, all these skills would have gone to bed. Similarly, at the University of Ghana, at the Noguchi Memorial Institute, you reckon that, well, researchers there are coming out with innovative research in trying to find a vaccine for this particular COVID date. So you reckon that, well, amidst these challenges also present some opportunities indeed for people to be working in synergy, just as well, Mohamed mentioned, as it stands now, well, we're working across region. Similarly, organizations are working across, and organizations are now, some theories that were hitherto they never believed in, now they are beginning to believe in it. Hitherto, if you advise an organization that, well, a concept of telecommuting or flexi system of work is important, especially looking at the traffic situation in the country, they will tell you that, well, no, employees are lazy and if you leave them to work from home. But now, the realities of the time has gotten organizations to indeed adapt to all these concepts, and they are utilizing them. Now employees are being engaged more to the benefit of organization. So I think that, well, COVID has presented to Africa a lot of good as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thanks a lot. I'll come to you, Carl. Yes.
Right, thank you. A couple of points come to my mind. I think firstly at a sort of an individual level, most of us are suddenly far more able to use different technologies such as our Zoom, etc. As Mohamed said, we're now able to, and we've always been able, for a long time, we've been able to communicate throughout Africa, but it's nice to see that suddenly we have these Pan-African webinars. That I think is a nice positive. I think an interesting one to me is at an individual level where COVID-19 has forced many people to get off what I call the treadmill. Where you wake up, you go to work, you work hard, you're trying to make as much money as possible, drive the right car, live in the right house. And I think there are many people who are now starting to reevaluate, is that really as important as I thought it was? why we've been forced off the treadmill. And I think certain people are going to question whether they want to get back onto that treadmill and whether they want that treadmill to be running at the pace that it was before. Final one is I think we're seeing certain green benefits, the levels of pollution, etc. throughout the world. We're seeing the value of certain things. Now, we can't go and maintain that, but I think many people are starting to say, but look what the environment does, look what happens to nature when we stop polluting it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Carl. Thank you very much for that. Yes, Basi, any good from COVID-19?
Thanks, Eugene. The colleagues have already mentioned most of what I've also thought about, but I do think that the cooperation across the world, not just Africa, but across the world, is definitely being emphasized now, especially in the scientific world. It's great to see how people are working together with a common problem and wanting to solve that problem. And then, of course, there's the whole question of seeing Ubuntu values again being displayed. Somebody asked the other day, what are these Ubuntu values? And I may just want to remind everybody, they are usually identified as respect and caring for one another, solidarity, sharing, reconciliation, reciprocity. So I think these are beautifully displayed across not just Africa, but also in the world. And as I said the other day, I hope that this will continue. The whole thing of mutual sharing, the whole thing of social responsibility. So on the value side, I do think there's also a complete rethink about where are we going for the future. Thanks, Eugene.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you very much. So, all right, so I'm going to go to the Q&A now. If you haven't, please help me take a look at the Q&A box. Any question you would like answered, upvote it. I will ask the questions with the highest number of upvotes. So I'm going to start, some are general questions, some are directed to particular panelists. On the first one, well, sorry, Uchora, this is for you. Well, not sorry, rather congratulations. So this is from Joy Onyinyechi Ekwaba. Thanks to the whole team for this session. My question goes to Uchora. Please, when it comes to labor turnover among the youth, what is the relationship between EI and lack of patience to sit down, learn to grow among new and young employees? Or do we just blame the institutions for the misbehavior and restlessness of generation Y and Z employees? Over to you, Chara.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Okay, so because I have not read any research on it, I hesitate to agree that there's a relationship between patience and emotional intelligence and so forth that I can really use at this time. However, a human being is a combination of nature and nurture. That's the truth. And so, yes, when people come to work with bad behavior, it's not just coming from the institutions. So we know from genes that some children are tougher to manage than others. However, the institutions have a large role to play. We've heard it said several times in Africa that it takes a village to raise a child. And so when you think about family, the question, for example, would be what would make somebody, a young man or a young woman, wake up and put in their letter of resignation without thinking about it? It's perhaps because they have options. It's perhaps because they don't have options. They have people who have allowed them to do that. As a young lady growing up, a lot of people, once you graduated from school, your family in Africa assigned you one of your siblings or one of your uncle's children or one of your auntie's children to pay school fees for. And so you were earning your first salary, it wasn't much, but you learned responsibility. And so before you took a pen and put it to paper to say that you're moving jobs, you thought it through. You thought of the responsibilities you had. You thought of the people you owed an explanation. And so in many ways, we have failed these children. We have raised them in a way that has made it difficult for organizations to work. But I do know that through the decades, organizations have always complained about the products they receive from universities and so on and so forth. And so this is the reason why I think that organizations should look at the figures. What are we receiving from universities and how can we make them useful and more productive in our environments? And this is the reason why emotional intelligence is important. It has to return to the families. It has to return to religion, to our religious institutions. It has to return to all our institutions so that the child that is produced, nature and nurture, is coming together to produce a child that is more benefit, you know, to the society than a problem for society. Because really, have you asked yourself, when these children leave the workplace and say they are not working again, who feeds them? Who clothes them? Who gives them the opportunity to hang out for a while before they move on to their next job? So this is how I would address that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Kwesi, you want to say something about that?
Yes, please, Eugene, a quick one. I would want to relate it to resilience and to say that, well, yes, individuals, when they come into organizations, yes, it is important that, well, leadership indeed try to integrate their goals into the organizational goals. Because sometimes the reason why people leave is that they don't find fulfillment in the organization. They reckon that their goals are at variance with that of the organization, and hence sometimes what they have to leave. And that what there should be there should be a strategy in creating that resilient culture, as I indicated earlier on. One of the things that could be done is that, well, yes, individuals prosper in an environment of success. So, well, within the organization, the promotion system within the organization should be such that, well, I mean, we have many organizations in Africa where the promotion is based on vacancy, promotion is based on other things, and not necessarily looking at the value contributions of individuals in there. Once individuals are successful in that environment in which they are operating, then they are ready to stay. Once they find out there are opportunities for them to develop and grow, they are also ready to stay. Sometimes when you bring in the new guys into the system, what you need to do is that, well, you need to integrate them in groups, that successful groups, so that they can enjoy vicariously from the success of the group. As the group succeeds, that in itself wraps off them, and that in itself boosts their confidence and wanting them to also stay. The last bit I want to talk about is the fact that, well, for most people, they don't go in for the jobs that match up with their personality and their qualifications. So, well, I've completed university, I need a job. I need to start something. I need to get going to identify myself. So sometimes when they move in there, they reckon that, well, no, this is not for me. Let me try another one. So it becomes a cyclical event where people keep moving on. But above all, if you are to identify the goals of individuals and integrate them into the goals of the organization, then we are sure to retain these people for a very long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. And on that note of retaining people, I'm going to ask a question from Chinwe Abama, because one of the complaints, if I may say complaints, or one of the comments which Jora made earlier was with reference to mobility of the millennials. So there's a question here from Chinwe Abama. Mohamed, yes, I think I'm going to throw this your way. Okay, so the question says, dynamism / mobility of millennials regarding their short stays in a job, average approximately 2 years. This dynamism is crucial in the resilience of cultures and economies. From the perspective of EI, how does this trend affect stability and sustainability of performance in organizations?
Okay. I'll try to give that question a shot, but honestly, let me say that I wouldn't be able to give you a solid answer on pinpointing how to address it, but I'll give you a thinking process of how we address it on a leadership level. Because when I was hearing the question, I remember a study that was shared a few months ago that was saying that the average person, by the time he reaches the age of 36, and I think this was on year 2030, he would have gone through at least 14 jobs. And I heard that, it was like, wow. And my mind was like, okay, what happened to loyalty and what happened to progress and development? And when we had discussions with people who are specialized in this area on talent management, their approach was, you can't try to fix the organization to adopt to this trend. This trend is happening. What you need to do is you need to understand that trend within your country, within your business sector, and then look at your business model and say, how can I readjust? So for examples of this, I've seen organization where they said, okay, we have 0 desks. You come in, you plug in wherever there's an empty desk, starting from the CEO all the way down, and there's no allocated desk. And they have done that for the last 5 years. Flexible hours, people who are going into jeans and backpacks where they used to go informal. So all these adjustments between the workforce, you have to understand what's a trend and what can you fight and not fight, and then see how can I rebuild my business model to do that. If I relate that to the COVID these days, I had 2 discussions last week with senior management organization. They say, you know what? We have been working effectively for the last 3 months from home. Do I have to go back to the office? Can I change my model? Can I reduce my cost? Can I go to a higher image building with less space with the same budget? And I think this is how we need to think about it and address it. And then whatever comes out as a result comes out. I see Carl is nodding your head. Do you want to add something here?
No, I have something else for Carl. I have something else for him. I want to touch as many questions as possible because we are running out of time. But before that, I'd like to read a comment from one of the participants, Irene Batebe. I believe Africa faces a crisis of leadership, which is affecting its development. Good leadership at the helm of the countries could contribute to resetting the course of many nations in Africa. Thank you for that contribution, Irene. Now, Carl, I'm coming to you with a question from Harrison. Harrison, where is the question? Here it is. How do we inculcate the development of EI in our students in African universities, especially in the area of entrepreneurship, education, and training? How do we inculcate the development of EI in our students in African universities, especially in the area of entrepreneurship, education, and training? Thanks, Carl.
Right, thank you. I think I'd like to look at this in 3 ways. In fact, what I'd like to do is make a comment on Irene's comment that leadership throughout Africa is essential. If we are going to realize our full potential, it's going to require leadership, and that is going to require responsible and ethical leadership. We've talked about corruption, and that has to have some form of foundation in EI and EQ. So that's just my comment on there. I totally agree with her, and that's why if you look at Lagos Business School, you look at Strathmore Business School, and all of the others represented here, there is so much emphasis on developing responsible, ethical leaders in Africa. And I certainly would not negate the older guys like myself, but guys, we have to start with youth and start developing leaders for the future. To get back to Harrison's question, I'd like to look at it in 2 ways. Before we get into the entrepreneurial side, what is it that the role that universities need to play in their education for EI and EQ? And I'm going to punt a little bit my university, which is Strathmore, a business school in Kenya. And our whole value system is contribution to society. And our whole focus on our students at our university is what we call developing the entire person. And that's what I think we need to be doing in our universities is you don't come to Strathmore to get an education. You come to Strathmore to learn to be an accountant or whatever, but we also focus on the entire person. We focus on how that person is developing, how they are living, moral, ethical. We have a strong value base. And I think we need to start understanding that that has to be part of education in Africa. And Basil referred to EI perhaps as being an elective in every single program. I think we have to start understanding that we have a responsibility that maybe universities don't have in other continents, we have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of society, not just to the knowledge level of our students. In terms of entrepreneurship, that may or may not link to EI, and I think it does, but I think it's a standalone issue as well. Certainly, if I look at a Southern African perspective, we do not develop our children enough in terms of entrepreneurship. We seem, and Basil would know better than I do, but in South Africa, we seem to develop our kids to be able to want to go and get a job working for a big organization. If I look at Kenya, I'm seeing a far greater emphasis on entrepreneurship. And again, that's got to be part of the upbringing of our children. As much as we've got to raise our children culturally and family-wise in terms of EI and EQ, I think we've got to do it in terms of entrepreneurship. And resilience probably would play a big part in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Thank you. May I ask the panelists if you have a second when I'm not talking to you to maybe share a link to all attendees where they can find more about you, because there are questions here. Okay, maybe your profile, a link to your profile, just paste it there to all attendees. But Mohamed, I need your attention because there is a question for you.
Yes, I'm here.
This is from Neka. Neka wanted you to share the 8 soft skills.
Oh, okay. The one that was a result for the top leaders. Okay, Nick, I'd like to probably shift your question or your thinking for a minute. Okay, the study was referring to a specific emotion intelligence model. It's called EQI 2.0, and in that specific model, it has 5 categories, and under each one is 3. However, this is not the only model out there. There's variations of different models, and they all talk about the same thing. It's just the angle and the depth that we look at one point versus the other. So an absolute score to be high by itself doesn't necessarily mean it's better. Okay, and I get concerned that when I communicate that reality testing, for example, was high, so everybody goes out and try to get the reality testing high. It doesn't necessarily result in this. Let me give you an example from an African perspective. So if I look at the score of self-regards, okay, which is one of the main aspects of self-perception. In Africa, the result I've seen to a lot of people I worked with on assessment indicates that regards to other score is higher than self-regards. Now, if I take that statement in an absolute meaning, it will translate that person who has a lower self-regards than regards to other, then his self-perception is lower, then his self-awareness is lower, then his ability to make decisions under stress is lower, okay? However, if you look in the context in our culture, which is a discussion we're having in part 1, you have to understand, why is that self-regards to other higher? Is it because respect of elder, respect to who's the head of our tribe? We have certain values in our culture that puts us in a position that I actually have to regard the person in front of me higher than mine. And if you look at that content, it doesn't have a direct relationship on your ability to make decisions under stress. It actually will be regarded with respect and empathy and social responsibility in other areas. But if the self to regard to others is lower because my belief that the counterpart who's working with me on a different country has a higher ability and expertise than mine, and it's affecting my self-confidence, then definitely my level of emotional intelligence in practice will be low. So in conclusion, the point I'm trying to make is, don't look at absolute values. You have to look at how that relates to my work, to my culture, then it has a meaning properly.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. Thanks a lot. I'm going to run the last poll now. While the poll is running, I would like to invite, because I have several questions here, but we have just 7 minutes. While the poll is running, I'll ask the panelists to prepare to give a closing comment. Okay, closing comments. I'll run the poll now. 1 second. So please, this is just a very short one, The poll is on now. I've never had an experience that has given me as much anxiety as a COVID-19 pandemic. Please help me attend this. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the last of a three-part series on emotional intelligence. We wanted to have, as we said earlier, a truly African conversation on COVID-19 and EI in Africa. On the 27th of May, part 1, COVID-19, emotional intelligence and the African context. Part 2, May 29th, COVID-19, emotional intelligence and organizations in Africa. Today, June 1st, part 3, COVID-19, leadership, institutions, and education in Africa. Can EI lead the way? At this point, before I close the poll, I'm going to invite the panelists to take maybe a minute to, maybe a closing remark. So, Uchora, we started with you the other time. The ladies are always winning. So I'm going to start with you again. Yes, Uchora, I'm going to start with you. Just a second, Uchora, I'm going to unmute.
I was hoping for the poll results to come in before I speak, but that's fine.
You want to wait for that?
That's fine. I can still speak. That's all right. And you know, just the point I was going to make is that, I mean, the world appeared to be a little fast and fiery right before COVID struck. And I kind of suspected that if it wasn't COVID bringing us to our knees, it would be something else. So first up is that there has been a global failure in leadership. It's not just Africa, it's the world. And therefore, I knew that at some point, something was bound to happen. If it wasn't COVID, it would be something else. But there's a lot of things, as we have seen today, that have come from it. For example, we've had this webinar, and one of the things we are seeing from this webinar is that, you know, IQ is just a threshold competence. It's good for our education, it's useful for a lot of things, but it isn't sufficient for individual performance, it isn't sufficient for leadership, and it isn't sufficient for organizational performance. It's emotional intelligence that matter more for superior performance. And therefore, one of the things I would ask everyone here is to embrace it, to begin to organize themselves for it, to reach out and try to get more of it, because it is useful. It is a very important area of human behavior. It still needs a lot of research in Africa and application, especially where education is concerned, because it is the change agent for development in this on this continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chora. I will ask the rest to just keep it to 30 seconds or less. Basi, you want to go? Basi, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you. I think that we need to recognize that developing your emotional intelligence is actually a lifelong journey. And so I would like to suggest in closing that maybe we should start by simply reading about the different emotional intelligence competencies. And then the key thing is to practice. Especially to many who may feel, but I always struggle in this area or that area, give yourself time. If there are about 16 competencies that we have identified, how about if we talk again 16 years from now? So give yourself about a year to really work on it, practice it, see how well you're doing, assessing yourself. And I think that's the way that we need to move forward. And then try and set the example for other people so that they can see. If you talk about self-regulation, they actually see it in you. They see it working for you. If you talk about empathy, they say, my word, that's exactly what I see displayed in his life. So that would be my parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Yes, Mohamed? Quick one.
I'll leave you with the thought that we have high potential people in Africa, really. but with low performance. And the missing link is not in their abilities, it's mainly in their emotional intelligence in practice.
Thank you, Mohamed. Carl?
Right, yeah, I'd like to pick up on something Uchuru said, that if you have a look at it, we seem to be able to look at leadership as a result of COVID-19, and we see many examples throughout the world where it has been poor. I believe you can link EQ or EI to many of those poor decisions, and I think that is just a lesson for all of us to make sure that as leaders going into the future, we are responsible and we are ethical, and that we have some empathy for others.
Thank you, Carl. Kwesi, 30 seconds, no more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eugene. Well, I would like to say that, well, the current pandemic has taught us to be resilient. And it is important that organizational leaders understand that, well, when we talk about being resilient, it has to do with developing the ability for immunity and also ensuring that, well, you are able to bounce back as well. In doing so, you require emotional intelligence to be self-aware and to also be socially aware in order to be able to rally your people, rally your team together to bounce back to business again and to prosper as well. So emotional intelligence is key for our resilience in these turbulent times. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Wagner from the Stratford Business School, Kenya. Thank you, Uchoro Odoji from Lagos Business School, Nigeria. Thank you, Kwesi Amponsah-Tawiah from the University of Ghana Business School, Ghana. Thank you, Mohamed Radwan from the American University in Cairo School of Business, Egypt. Thank you, Basi Leonard from the University of Stellenbosch Business School, South Africa. Thank you for this very interesting conversation, 3-part series on emotional intelligence. Thank you, participants, for being with us. We will share the recordings with you. My name is Eugene Ohu from Lagos Business School. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.